Thank you all for joining us. Once we have a critical mass, we will be beginning very shortly. So we are going to get started, and we will allow some more people to filter in. I know that this is the beginning of lunch for students as they're getting out of class. So very quickly, I want to begin by thanking you all for being here and by thanking Becca, my co-host for this event, for putting this together. And of course, a very special thanks to Mr. Meade, who is here with us from the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. We also want to acknowledge that there is some ongoing tension in our country due to the events that have occurred last week in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and in Chicago as well. And so our mission is more important now than ever to foster empathetic and compassionate and wide-ranging dialogue and to uplift marginalized voices. And we all hope that we can continue to be instruments of that encounter on this campus. Without further ado, though, I will turn it over to voting rights advocate and leader of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, Mr. Desmond Meade.
Thank you, David. How's everybody doing? You can respond by just waving your hand. All right, I see, Ali, you put both hands up too. That's great. So listen, first of all, I am so honored to be invited to speak with you all about a very important topic, especially like David said, in the light of what's been going on in this country over the past, well, actually forever and a day, but really has been heightened over the last a few days. And I guess you'll see as the talk goes on that it is very much connected. I want to invite you all that if you have questions while I'm talking, you can just put it in the chat, and I'm going to make sure to do my best to get to every question. Let me just say that there's no question that is too personal or too controversial, right? Because one thing, I did my research on you all, right? And you said if you're not willing to have your idea challenged, right? Then, I mean, how firm can you be on that idea? And I believe the same thing as well. And so I would encourage you to don't hesitate, even if you think the question may be controversial or too personal. You are more than welcome to answer it. And I am more than willing to attempt to answer that question, okay? Is that cool? So let me just start out, about who I am, and when I do that, I normally go back to August of 2005 in South Florida, because on a day in August of that year, I found myself standing in front of railroad tracks, right, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. That day that I stood there, I was at my lowest in my life. I was homeless. I was addicted to drugs. I was recently released from prison, and I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't have any self-esteem and none of that. And the main thing that was going through my head at the time was how much pain I was going to feel when I jumped in front of the oncoming train. Whether, when that train hit me, was I going to die instantly, or did I had to go through moments of agonizing pain? And I can tell you, I'm a wimp. I'm even scared of needles. But even the thought of a train crushing my body, right, was not enough to make me move. And I stood there and I waited, and I waited on that train. I was ready to go. I didn't have nothing else to live for. But I'm a person of faith, and I believe that God had other plans for me. And the train never came. And I eventually crossed those tracks, and I walked a couple blocks further, and I checked myself into a drug treatment facility. And I was uh, admitted into drug treatment for a 4-month program. After graduating, I moved into a homeless shelter. And while living at the homeless shelter, I'm racking my mind trying to figure out what to do next. But what I did know that I did not want to use drugs again, right? And I was a person that I've been addicted for quite some time, and I had been homeless previously for quite some time. And I know that vicious cycle of drug addiction, where you may stop, right? Your life may start to improve, and then something would happen, and you would pick up a drug or a drink or whatever, and next thing you know, you're spiraling down right back to where you were before, even worse. And I didn't want to do that, because I figured that if I were to relapse and start using drugs again, the next time I get in front of railroad tracks, I may not be as lucky. And so I decided to go to school. I figured that maybe if I can, get a little bit of education, that would help raise my self-esteem, and maybe it would help me not pick up drugs again. And so I enrolled at a local college in Miami called Miami-Dade Community College. I enrolled in its paralegal program, ended up graduating at the top of my class. And my professors encouraged me to continue my education. So I pursued a bachelor's degree in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice, right? And I picked that because I figured I had a lot of experience getting arrested. I had a lot of experience appearing before judges, and hopefully that experience would translate into classroom success. And guess what? It did. And I ended up graduating with my bachelor's with highest honors. And I was eventually accepted into law school. And I got accepted into Florida International University's College of Law. And in May of 2014, I actually graduated with a law degree, right? My Juris Doctorate. And when I used to tell people the story, they're like, wow, what a great story. And they're clapping. And then I would say, but guess what? My story does not have a happy ending, because in spite of all of those things, or the obstacles I was able to overcome, in spite of the fact that, back in 2005, 2006, when I dedicated my life to giving back to the community, dedicated my every fiber of my body towards community service, in spite of the commitments that I've made and the accomplishments that I was able to achieve, because I lived in the state of Florida, I couldn't vote. I didn't have my civil rights restored. Because I lived in Florida, I couldn't even practice law, because I was not allowed to sit for the Florida bar until my civil rights were restored. And as it relates to even me getting housing, there was a lot of places where I couldn't rent or even own a home until my civil rights were restored. And Florida at the time was a place that had a lifetime ban on people with felony convictions, which meant that if anybody was convicted for any felony offense, that they would lose their civil rights, to include the right to vote, for the rest of their life. And when I mean any offense, I really do. A lot of times when people think of crime, or people getting convicted, or people with a felony conviction, you know, they typically think of some really bad crimes. But in Florida, you can lose the right to vote for the rest of your life for driving with a suspended license, burning a tire in public, disturbing turtle nesting eggs on the beach, catching a lobster whose tail is too short, right? Trespassing on a pier or construction site. And my favorite one was this guy for Valentine's Day, rather than giving his girlfriend a dozen roses, he released 12 red balloons in the air. And the police officer seen them and arrested him right on the spot. And if he were to have been convicted, he would have lost the right to vote for the rest of his life. And so there was something that was inherently wrong with that. Personally, I believe that the right to vote is the most telling example of citizenship. That nothing speaks more to being an American citizen than being able to go into a voting booth and cast a ballot, right? And when you talk about something that valuable, one of the things that I push back against is the fact that politicians have the power to determine who actually could exercise that right, right? And so you have these people that are making these policies that saying, okay, well, you can't vote because you convicted of a felony offense, but I'm going to let you vote because maybe you'll vote the way I want you to vote, right? And then everywhere, all these different states have all these different rules, but we know in Maine and Vermont, nobody ever loses their right to vote. And so knew that there was something wrong and figured out that we needed to do something about it. But let's talk about what was at the heart of what was wrong with felon disenfranchisement. We know that felon disenfranchisement really took showed its head during what we call the Reconstruction era, after the slaves were freed, and that the felon disenfranchisement were a part of a group of laws called Jim Crow laws that basically sought to strip away the political capital of the newly freed slaves. I always like to tell that story in a different way in order to really give people an understanding of what happened back then and its relevance to what is happening right now. So when you go back, if we go back to the days of slavery, one of the first things that we have to understand, I think people lose sight of this, is that there was slavery in the United States for 400 years. 400 years. And a lot of people don't even realize that it's not even that many years since slavery ended that we've been, this country, since slavery has ended, has not even reached the 400 mark yet. So this country have more years of promoting slavery than anything else. So now you have slavery going on for 400 years to where you have the slave owner whose father, grandfather, great-grandfather ingrained in them some concepts. Number one, that people that look like me, people from Africa, people who were slaves, were not even human. We were not even like a complete man, right? That we were beasts, that we were dangerous, right? That we didn't have the intellect, right? And it's best not to even try to teach us how to read, right? Because then we can become more dangerous, right? And it was okay because even the Bible, I could point to the Bible and show that it's okay to have a slave, and it is okay to treat them worse than you would even treat an animal, right? And so you would see the atrocities that was brought on to the slaves, whether they were murdered, whether they were beaten until the flesh was no longer on their bodies. They were families separated, men and women are raped and beaten. And this went on for 400 years. Then one day, this slave owner, he wakes up and the state, or the government, I should say, is telling him that those very same people who he despised and treated worse than an animal, right, now had the same rights that he had, right? So that in itself is traumatic, because any of you could imagine if you were taught something, if your mom or dad taught you something growing up as a kid, all the way up to where you are right now, and that was taught to them by your grandmother, and that was taught to your grandmother by by your great grandmother is something that has been ingrained in your family for generations. And then all of a sudden, someone comes to you and tell you that everything that your parents and your grandparents told you was wrong, right? How would you react to that, right? And so when the government is coming and saying that those very same people who I was taught was beneath me, was not even worthy of being in my presence, right? And definitely not sitting at a table with me or being in the same room with me unless they're serving me. Now you're telling me that they have the same rights that I have. Well, I got a problem with that. But the worst part was this, that the people, the slaves that were freed, actually started exercising those rights. And the very same people that were slaves you seen getting elected to Congress, getting elected as council members, as sheriffs, getting placed in positions of authority, right? That was the deal breaker there, right? Because I remember I have a nephew that was named after me, named Little Desmond. And I remember he wasn't too much younger than me, but you know, I had the advantage. And every time we were playing around roughhousing, I always got the best of him. I remember one case we were playing cowboys and Indians, whatever, and I tied him around a tree. And I remember every time he was crying, I would throw water in his face, right? And I remember that day he was like, "Oh, Big Desmond," he was crying. He said, "One of these days you're going to get old and I'm going to get you back," right? And I didn't think about that. You know, I it really didn't mean too much to me at that moment because I had the advantage on him. But he ended up leaving, going with his dad and his mom because his dad was in the Navy. And so they got transferred to another state. And the next time I seen little Desmond, he was 6'4", 240 pounds. And as I'm looking up to little Desmond, you know, the only thing that was going through my mind was, man, I hope he don't remember all of those things I did to him, right? Retribution. That word is so key. And so when you look at a person who you have despised and belittled and degraded, right, for all of these years, and you know that, wait a minute, I just beat the hell out this guy, right, to all the way to his bone. I just raped his wife. I just sold his daughter into to another slave owner. And God, I remember what my dad did to his mama, right? Right. And his daddy. I remember my dad raping his daddy, right? And hanging his uncle and all of these things I did to this man. And now he's the sheriff. Now he's the a council member. Now he's the mayor. Oh my God, what is he going to do to me? And so that created an urge to do something to strip this person and strip all of these people of that right. And what did we do? Well, one of the first things they did was they created laws that would criminalize trivial behavior or criminalize things that they would expect a slave to do as opposed to a white person. Excuse me. So that means that now if you steal a chicken, that's a felony that will result in you losing your civil rights. But if you kill your wife, yeah, that's a felony, but you'll keep your civil rights, right? And you've seen those disparities in the type of laws that were created, and they were specifically designed, right? Loitering, you know, you're going to jail. You know, being a vagrant, you're going to jail. Walking along railroad tracks, you're going to jail. Now, what happened, and they came up with, you know, I would say it's a brilliant, it was an evil but brilliant plan. They said, okay, we'll criminalize what the newly freed slaves are doing, and then we're able to convict them and strip them of the right to vote, the right to run for office and all of that stuff, throw them in jail, and then what we can do is we can outsource them as prison labor where? Right back into the same fields that they was just liberated from, right? And then for those, so that's felon disenfranchisement right there in a nutshell. But then the other pieces was that whoever I don't get through felon disenfranchisement, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, okay, well, if you want to vote, you have to pay to vote. You have to pay a poll tax, knowing that those slaves, where they're going to get the money from, right? They were just released from bondage, right? And if they're able to scrape up enough pennies to do the poll tax, then I'm saying, okay, well, you have to also know how to read. Well, because I know that it's against the law. It was against the law to teach a slave how to read. So I came up with literacy tests. And some of the questions on there were some outlandish questions, right? And if that didn't work, even if somebody was able to get through that much, what I did was I used state-sanctioned violence, right, to intimidate those folks. And I would burn crosses. I would hang people. If you tried to register to vote, you risked your life. You risk your livelihood. You risk your family's life and your home just to register to vote. And you risk it again if you even tried to go vote. Well, what do I mean by state-sanctioned violence? Well, who are these people that we're using to lynch? We were using slave patrols, right? You guys ever heard of slave patrols? Slave patrols have evolved into what? The police. The police, right? And so back then you had, yes, sheriffs were a part of lynching people who all they wanted to do was to be a part of democracy, right? And so when you even see all of that stuff back then, you see it playing out today, right? With felon disenfranchisement, with almost 6 million people in the country who can't vote because of a prior felony conviction, and all these different crazy laws that will create these hurdles. Like in Florida, when we won Amendment 4, they created a law that said, oh, no, you can't get the right to vote back just yet until you pay your court fines and fees, right? Another modern day poll tax, right? When we've seen in Ferguson how police officers were patrolling voting locations during elections looking for people with warrants. That was another way of intimidating people from going to the polls and voting. And of course, we know about our private prison industry, even though it does make up a small percentage of our prisons. But in our private prison industries, we see to where folks are taking people who are incarcerated and basically forcing them to work for pennies on the dollar. And in some cases, we even see it even in state prisons. And that drives not only our criminal justice industry, but as well as our immigration detention industry as well. And so I'm faced with all of this, and it seems so overwhelming. And it seems like, that there's nothing that can be done about it. But, I was inspired to say, maybe we can do something about it. And I was inspired to start a ballot initiative to restore voting rights to people, because in Florida there was over 1.54 million at the time, but it grew to over 1.68 million people who could not vote because of a prior felony conviction. The problem with that, I don't know what just happened. Did you guys lose my video?
Yeah, it seems to have cut out for a second.
Okay, hold on. Let's try this one. How about this? Y'all got that one?
Yep.
Okay, and so what we seen was, when you think about that number, 1.68 million people, that's more people than the population of over, I think, 14 US states and territories, and definitely over 40, 50 countries in the world. That was a lot of people, right? And Florida by itself had accounted for a quarter of the total amount of people in the United States who couldn't vote because of a prior felony conviction. And so I set out to launch a ballot initiative, and we did in October of 2014. And we had to collect a ton of petitions, over 1 million petitions. It took us 2 years, a little over 2 years to do so. But once we did collect enough petitions, we were able to make the ballot. And in November of 2018, we were able to pass Amendment 4, which automatically restored voting rights to people with felony convictions once they completed their sentence. You know, um, one of the things that I loved about the campaign was that early on, when I first found out about felon disenfranchisement, and hearing the stories about where it originated and how it was used to, strip the newly freed slaves of access to democracy, or prevent them from having access to democracy. You know, I could have sworn that only African Americans were disenfranchised. But as I started traveling the state of Florida, I started meeting so many people from so many different walks of life. There were more people who could not vote in the state of Florida that looked more like Becca than look like me. To be totally honest, you know, Jacob fit the profile of the majority of people who could not vote because of a prior felony conviction. I don't know if that is an illusion or what, but it seemed like his profile picture smiled when I said that. That is so cool. But anyway, and I found that out. And so I started realizing that even though the history of felon disenfranchisement was steeped in racism, right? Like a tumor left unchecked, if a tumor could be in one part of your body, but if you leave it unchecked, it can grow to other parts of your body. And I think that that's what felon disenfranchisement was, a tumor that was left unchecked. And as a result, now it impacted people from all walks of life. So it's not only just Black people now who couldn't vote because of a prior felony conviction. It was white, Spanish, Latino, people from all ethnicities, all socioeconomic backgrounds. And so I seen an opportunity to take an issue that was initially intended to deprive people like me of access to democracy, and use and frame it in such a way that it became an all-American issue, right? It became more of an issue about our humanity than about politics, right? And in doing so, we were actually able to be very successful with a campaign that the experts thought never had a chance of success in Florida. But one of my proudest moment was in November of 2018 when we passed Amendment 4. We had over 5.1 million people that voted yes on Amendment 4. And I love telling folks this, that it was a million more people who voted for Amendment 4 than for any candidate that was running for governor of our state at the time, right? And the other thing was that there was over a million people who were registered Republicans that voted for Amendment 4, which showed that there was a broad cross-section of support. But my favorite piece is the fact that those 5.1 million votes, that we felt that those votes was not based on hate, those votes was not based on fear, but rather those votes was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And when we passed Amendment 4, we actually showed the world that love can, in fact, win the day, right? In spite of all of the difficulties that we're facing, even today, right? And our fight against racism, right? Our fight against the politicization of our country and the dehumanization of people, right? In spite of all of that, there is a bright spot, right? And that bright spot is the fact that love can conquer all. And I'm a person that's a firm believer, right? That, well, I learned this when I was in drug treatment, is that you don't hate the person, you hate the disease. You hate the disease of addiction, right? And so I know that even though that there's somebody that's out there that hates me, let me tell you, you want to talk about some trying times. When we were out there collecting petitions, and I used to drive across the state of Florida, there were some counties that where, as I was entering into the county, I would actually stop my car and go in my trunk and get something out of my trunk and put it in the back seat of my car, right? And no matter how many times I spoke, right? Nobody's ever been able to guess what it was that I got out of my truck. And I'm not going to ask you to try to guess because you'll never guess. But let me tell you what I got. Make America Great Trump campaign sign, right? Because I figured, right? And I would get it out and I would put it in the back seat of my car. Because if the police would ever stop me, I would make sure that all my windows are rolled down. And as they're approaching my car with their guns drawn, because I know it's going to be drawn, as they're approaching my car, they're going to look in that back area of my car and they're going to see that sign. And they may think that, oh, he's one of those good Negroes. And maybe, just maybe, I'll make it home alive. That's the reality of the world that we live in even to today. I say that story to say that when I was out there collecting petitions and encouraging people to vote for Amendment 4 to expand the franchise to people with felony convictions, I understood that some of those people were people that probably hated me because of the color of my skin. But even those people deserve an opportunity to have their voices heard if we're talking about having a true democracy. And so I was fighting just as hard for that person that wished they could have voted for Donald Trump as I was for that person that wanted so desperately to vote for President Barack Obama. That there was no distinction because of a person's political preferences. And I knew that even to this day, that there are people, right, that probably despise me because of the color of my skin. There are people that are racist as hell. But even them, if they're an American citizen, they've done their time, then they deserve an opportunity to participate in our democracy. And it was in that spirit, I believe, that we're able to move people and we're able to transform minds, hearts, and minds and win people over to the light, right? That we don't have to fight each other and tear each other down, right, to accomplish anything in this country. That we can organize or come together along the lines of humanity and make great, and have a great impact on our communities, on our state, on this nation, and the world. You know, I want to go ahead and just I want to stop there because I want to give folks time to ask some questions. No one asked a question, right? But you can type your questions in there if you can. And as those questions are coming in, I'll make sure to answer them as well.
Folks are also welcome to unmute their mics if you're more comfortable speaking your questions, or you can pop a question in the chat, either way.
Yes, you can. And so let's talk. I want to talk a little bit about, what happened after we passed Amendment 4. So, I'm bragging, love won the day, that we brought people together from all walks of life, all political persuasions, and we actually won Amendment 4, right? But what happened was immediately after that, politicians or politics just stuck his ugly hand into the mix and just kind of messed everything up. And then you've seen that politicians in Florida, because in Florida we have a conservative dominated legislature, as well as a conservative governor who felt that they needed to pass implementation laws in order to properly implement Amendment 4. I liken it to a story of politicians walking past a homeless family for many years, and they know that this family was living outside, whether it was rain, sleet, or snow, that these folks had no shelter, and the politicians walking by them every day did not lift a finger to help. Then all of a sudden, people in the community came together and they decided that they wanted to do something for that homeless family. And so they built them a home. They built them a beautiful home. And no sooner did they finish building the home, here comes the politicians wanting to demand how the home is furnished, right? And that's exactly what happened with Amendment 4. Politicians had this felon disenfranchisement policy has been in place in Florida for 150 years, and nothing was ever done. Nothing was ever done to change that. But the minute Amendment 4 passed, and all of a sudden, these folks want to make sure that it's implemented right. And in doing so, what they actually did was create an additional barrier. And they required that before a person is able to actually exercise their right to vote, they would have to ensure that they owe no money to the courts, which meant that they had to pay all of their outstanding legal financial obligations, whether they're fines, fees, or even court costs. They had to pay it in full before actually being able to register to vote and exercise their rights. And so when they did that, what happened was it impacted about 774,000 returning citizens in Florida. Many of them were people who were too poor, and they were forced to choose between, paying their rent or their mortgage or voting, or putting food on their table or voting. And what we did, how we responded to that, was by starting a fines and fees fund, which last year we ended up raising over $27 million, and we paid off fines and fees. We spent the entire amount paying off fines and fees of I think 44,000 plus some change individuals who are no longer now restricted from being able to register to vote. The other thing that we did was that we were able to go to the courts and use the courts to have a judge waive a person's fines and fees for the purposes of being able to register to vote. And we were able to do that in a couple of judicial circuits here in Florida. And in the meantime, we had a remaining balance of about 600,000 returning citizens who didn't know anything. We sought them out. We didn't get everybody, but we also sought them out to try to get them registered to vote. And so we were able to register about 80 something thousand returning citizens last year. And the majority of them actually showed up to vote. We're still doing that now. We're still engaged with getting folks registered and signing them up for fines and fees, and educating folks about being able to vote. I can tell you that, I didn't realize, number one, the impact of Amendment 4 and how people was going to react to it. People who, the minute it was passed, wanted to register to vote. And then what I also didn't understand or fully appreciate was actually the impact of voting. Now, that might sound strange because I was a person that was directly impacted. I'm a returning citizen. And I remember in 2016 when my wife ran for office and I couldn't even vote for her. And I remember the pain that I felt when I was reminded that I couldn't vote for her, and the frustration and the anger. I remember that. I am a voting rights advocate. But even though I was all of that, I still didn't realize the depths of that until last year. I didn't realize the depths of voting until I voted in my very first presidential election last November. I didn't realize the depths of voting until I voted in my first primary in over 30 years last August, and how that felt. And I definitely didn't truly understand the impact on other people until I seen people in their 60s and 70s and even 80s voting for the first time ever in their lives, and just seeing the joy in their eyes and the tears streaming down their cheeks as they walked out of a polling location, just overjoyed, and just brought the tears because of that experience. I did not realize that But today I have a newfound respect for that right to vote, and that newfound respect has strengthened my resolve to continue the work that we've been doing in Florida around rights restoration. So I'm going to go to a couple of questions. What key strategies that you use on your work on Amendment 4 can be implemented in other states working to overturn felon disenfranchisement? Well, that's a good question. I think that there is a few things. And I don't think that some of these strategies is only for a work around felon disenfranchisement. I think it's work for a lot of issues. I think one of the things that I was able to identify is that sometimes the way we go about campaigns, we automatically limit who we can talk to and who can talk to us, right? Um, it's a world that we have inherited or have evolved to a point where there are just certain things that if we know, hey, Republicans are against this, Democrats is for this or against this, and when we have an issue, we've got to go talk to Democrats, right? Don't waste time with Republicans. And we didn't take that approach because I told you when I was driving around the state of Florida, I seen that felon disenfranchisement impacted everybody. And so when I first started collecting petitions, I went directly to conservative counties and I singled out conservative voters to get them to sign my petition and have a conversation with them. And I'm going to tell you, in all of the years that I was doing that, I could only recount 2 instances where it was no way that I was going to get that person to sign a petition. But in doing so, in being willing to have conversations with people who I'm told don't agree with me, or people who I may feel may hate me because of the color of my skin or how they think I vote, in being bold enough to have a conversation and connect with them, what I found was that there's one thing with the political rhetoric on top, on the grass tops, but when you get down into the heart of the community, that there is so many things that binds us together that just, I believe, outweighs or outnumber the things that separate us, right? And I was able to have great conversations with people from all walks of life. And so I think that a strategy is to not limit yourself to who you can talk to, right? Talk to the people who you think are not for you or not for it. Have that conversation. Be willing and courageous enough to connect with them. I think in doing so, you're able to not only win like conservatives, but let me tell you, there's a unofficial third party in the United States called the Independent Party, because there's so many people now that are registering independent or no party affiliation. What about those folks? They're going to get the vote too, and so I think that being able to not limit yourself allows you great inroads even with independent voters, and you can generate a majority of support for your issues. Oh, wow. David, I like this. Can you describe a bit about the previous personal appeal rights restoration process? That's a great question. So in 2008, I think 2006, we had a Republican governor he was a Republican at the time, Charlie Crist. He's now a Democrat, but at the time he was a Republican governor. And he adopted a policy that said, okay, we're going to automatically restore civil rights to include voting rights to people who are convicted of less serious offenses. And during that, and everybody else can apply, right? But you would have to actually go before the board. In 4 years, during Governor Crist's tenure, over 155,000 people were able to have their rights restored. Then came a new governor, Rick Scott, in 2010. He was elected. He took office January 2011. The very first thing he did was roll back that policy and added on waiting period. So now nobody got anything automatic. And everybody had to apply. And if you wanted to apply, you could only apply after 5 or 7 years after completing your sentence. So that meant that, David, if you wanted to apply to have your civil rights restored, and we're in April of 2021, right? You would have to wait until April of 2028 before you're able to apply, right? And then after you apply in April of 2028, it probably won't be until April of 2038 before you even find out if you have a shot at having a hearing, because applying does not guarantee that you have a hearing. If you're lucky enough in April of 2038 to get a hearing, when you walk in those doors, you have less than 0.0001% of a chance of getting your rights restored. Now, some people think that that was an exaggeration, but I was just at a clemency hearing last month, and there was an attorney there that talked about his client, and his client applied to have his civil rights restored. You ready for this? In 2008. You do the math. So that's 13 years after this guy applied, and he had an attorney, and he still have not yet been granted a hearing. And so, and then, like I said, even if you're lucky enough to get a hearing granted, after 17, 20 years, when you walk in there, your chances are slim to none. And the governor does not have to have any reason whatsoever for denying you. So the whole process of determining who get their rights restored is a purely arbitrary process, right? And because of that, there is no rhyme and reason, what you know is that partisan politics will play a role in determining who gets the vote and who don't get the vote. We've seen Governor Rick Scott. We've had guys walk in there, white guys walk in there, says, I want to vote for you, Governor, and they got their rights restored. You had African-American walk in right after him and say, I just want to move on with my life. Denied, and we've seen it time and time again. And so my position was that was way too much power for any politician to have, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever. No politician should have that much power to be able to arbitrarily decide who votes and who don't vote.
Thank you for that answer.
Meg, are there any exceptions thinking about those who stormed the Capitol? So let me just say this. I think that, I don't know if any of you all have little brothers, right? But I have 4 sons. And I'm going to tell you that at least 3 out of the 4, at some point or another, are going to do something real crazy or stupid, right? Like, what were you thinking, right? And when I think of my sons and I think about what they could or might do, the one thing I know is that no matter what it is that they do, that they will always still be my son. And so I believe that, nothing speaks more to citizenship than being able to vote, right? So therefore, I don't think anyone should ever lose their right to vote, no matter what they've done, right? Like in Maine and Vermont, people vote while they're incarcerated. In Puerto Rico, prisoners in Puerto Rico was able to vote during the presidential preference primaries. In many countries throughout the world, people are able to vote while incarcerated. So I don't think anyone should ever lose the right to vote. But I understand some states take it away. You committed a felony. We're going to take it away from you. Okay, cool. But the minute you are released, the minute you've completed your sentence, that you should be able to get it back, right? And so even those people who stormed the Capitol, right? Yeah. Now the only thing that where I believe that a person uh can possibly just lose the right to vote forever is in a case of treason, right? And so if any of those people that stormed the Capitol was charged and convicted for treason, okay, I could see that. But any other crime, you know, they shouldn't lose the right to vote. And if they do, they should get it back once they completed their sentence, once they serve their time, because when the debt is paid, it's paid. So are there any, did I miss any questions? No. So I would like to see. There's no question. I really would like to end with this. You know, I go back to this word love. I go back to the struggles that we have in this world with police shootings and racism and everything, and understand that these are things that we should fight against. We should fight against voter suppression, right? My thing is that I believe that in spite of everything that's going on, that we can still be driven not by hate, right, but not by fear, but by love. That we can overcome these. One of the things that I had likened our campaign to was that we connected with people along the lines of humanity. You know, one of the examples I like to use is that we see the greatness in humanity, or even in our country, seems like after natural disasters, right, or in times of duress. You know, and I do believe that we don't have to wait for natural disasters to happen in order to operate in this environment. You know, one of the examples I use is Meg. You know, Meg is driving down the street, and Meg, you see an accident ahead, and you decide you want to stop, right? You stop your car, you get out the car, you run up to the accident, and there's someone there laying on the ground, right? Meg, I'm willing to bet that your first question is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump, right? It's not going to be, what's your sexual identity? It's not going to be, what's your immigration status? It's not going to be how much money you make, right? In that moment right there, Meg, you're going to be saying one out of two things. Are you okay? How can I help? Right? And it is in those moments that we are at our best, right? That we are, what we see as another human being, and that's what we care about. That's what we prioritize. We don't care about your politics, your sexual preference, your identity. We don't care about any of that. All we see is that there's another human being in duress, and there's a connection there, right? And so I believe that even with the tensions that we're seeing now across the country, that there's a space that we can create and can connect with each other to get out of this situation, to deal with and combat the racism and the marginalism and the patriarchy and the homophobias and all of the isms and all of this. I believe that there's a space there that we can create and combat that, and that we can actually forge ties with unlikely allies in doing so. That's what I believe, right? But there have to be, I think our efforts have to be driven by love, right? And not hatred or fear. You know, MLK says that hate can't drive out hate, and fear can't drive out fear. But what can defeat them is love, right? Love, LOVE. And if we can learn to love our way through this, I think that we'll be in a much better off position. But thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak. I apologize for my main camera going out, but I hope you got something from this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Desmond, for making time to come and speak with us. We can't thank you enough. We know that it's really hard to do things over Zoom sometimes, and so we really, really appreciate your time and your energy. and just the fact that you had such a great story to share with all of us today. I know that you have an incredibly exciting meeting to go to right after this, so I want to give you a couple of minutes to get there. But thank you again so much for making time
Thank
for
you
us
all
today.
so much. Have a great one.
Thank you. We appreciate you, Desmond.
All right. Appreciate you too, David. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to this today. Bye.